Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name's Narelle Hudson, and thanks, Alistair, for setting that up. We've got some live streaming happening here too, so you will be able to see this online as well if you're not here today. So hello to everyone who's not in front of me as well. My name's Narelle, as I said, and I am a counsellor. I'm from Brisbane, finding it a little bit chilly here today, but nice to be back in Melbourne. It's been quite a while since I've been in Melbourne. So lovely that things have opened up again. So lovely to be with you all here today. This topic that I'm going to talk to you about today is one of those topics that sometimes scares people away. As a society, we do shy away from grief and loss. So thank you to the people in the audience who've been brave enough to join me here today. This is a big topic. Grief and loss in general is something that society is not always comfortable talking about. But then when we move to the topic I'm going to share with you today, infertility and loss, even less people are sometimes willing to have that conversation. I'm a grief counsellor, and in my grief counselling, we refer to different losses like infertility loss, like suicide, like trauma and homicide. We refer to those ones as disenfranchised grief because they're not just grief, they're this grief that society doesn't always accept or acknowledge. And so that makes it even harder for the griever to do their grief work. And I call it grief work because it's a job. You would know if you've experienced grief how hard it can be. And so it makes it harder with this disenfranchised grief that I talk about for people to share that with their loved ones and with people in society because it's not recognised that it's a real loss sometimes, or it makes people so uncomfortable that they shy away from it, I should say, and they don't want to talk about it. And so then the griever, they get the message directly or indirectly that they can't share their pain because people aren't willing or aren't able to hold space for them. So inevitably what usually happens is that pain gets pushed down and it gets pushed aside, it gets bottled up, and it just stays inside us and it causes sicknesses and illnesses because we don't feel like we can do our healing. And when we're going through grief and loss, we need to heal. It's important. It's so important for us to do healing because grief is really just love. It's our way of expressing the love we had for the loved one who's passed away. And we need to be able to express those feelings because the only way that we can really move forward with our grieving, I hate the term get over it because I don't think we ever get over grief. But the only way we can move forward and learn how to carry our grief more comfortably over time is if we walk through those feelings. I've heard people refer to it as a wilderness. It's this crazy, dark place sometimes where you have to navigate your way through the grief before you can get out to the other side, to a place where, in grief terms, they use the word acceptance. I don't love that term. I think sometimes there are lots of different acceptances along the way, but I don't think we ever get to a place where we're like, okay, I found that I totally accept that I've lost this person and that's okay with me. I don't think we ever get to that place. I think that's unrealistic. But the goal in grief work is to find some meaning in the loss. And that doesn't mean for an instant that the loss is okay, that you're okay that it happened, because you never have to be okay that that person is not here anymore. But finding meaning is usually referring to you. You find meaning in who you become because of that loss. And in our society, we might hear the terms PTSD. Put your hand up if you've heard that term, post-traumatic stress disorder. We talk about that all the time when we're going through trauma and loss, and grief often is traumatic. As I said before, if it's infertility or it's suicide or it's a traumatic sudden loss that you weren't expecting, there's often trauma attached to that as well. And yes, you may have trauma and there may be some PTSD. We know that that happens for people who have come back from wars and have that deep trauma that they need to heal. But there is a flip side to that PTSD that society often doesn't talk to or refer to, because remember, we're not that good at talking about grief anyway. So the flip side of that, which is often a new concept to lots of people I speak to and lots of my clients, is this post-traumatic growth. It means, it's part of that meaning again. It means you come out the other side after your loss. Remember, you don't get over it, but you come out the other side a very different person, often, to the person you were before you lost your loved one. Because after we lose someone, we're not the same. We're never the same again. So we become this different person. And that's this post-traumatic growth that I refer to. That means this growth that we experience is this new person we become. It means that we learn from our experience. And yes, we would never, ever choose to go through this loss because it's so painful. But because we've been through this grief and loss, and because we've survived this experience, we grow from this and we get new perspectives on life. And we become a new person because of what we've been through. So I think it's very important that we don't just remember that deficit model of the post-traumatic loss, but we also remember the post-traumatic growth that we experience. And as a grief counsellor, my job is often just to validate and normalise what people are feeling, to hold space for them. Because, as I mentioned, lots of your loved ones might not be very good at this. And it's not because they have ill intentions. It's not because they care. Once upon a time, I thought it was maybe that they didn't care, that they couldn't handle my pain. But I don't believe it's that. It's just because it hurts them so much and makes them so uncomfortable to see you in so much pain. So it's hard for them to be a witness to your pain. And as a grief counsellor, I get the privilege to witness other people's pain. And people ask me all the time, why would you do your job? It's so depressing listening to people cry all day and listening to their painful stories. I had a man on the plane this morning ask me the same thing. But it's actually such a gift to be able to hold space for someone, to acknowledge this grief and to honour their experiences and what they've been through, and to just allow them to feel what they feel, because we don't often have the space to do that. People are trying to fix us. People are trying to cheer us up and make us feel better. So often we don't have this space to do the healing, which is very, very important. And people often also ask me how long this grief lasts. And I think that's a question that is hard to answer as well, because I often say, how long is a piece of string? We can't measure how long the grief work is going to take. It depends on a few factors. It depends on your relationship with the person and how close you were to them. And not only the primary loss, as we call it, losing the loved one, but also all those secondary losses that we experience that often don't get acknowledged. I know in infertility and loss, those secondary losses are like the title of my book that I've written, The Baby Dream. So the secondary loss is the dream. The primary loss was to lose my son, but the secondary loss was to lose that dream of being a mother, to lose that dream of seeing my son learn to walk and talk and go to school. I know with older couples, when they lose a spouse, sometimes those secondary losses can be financial losses. Sometimes they have never even managed the finances by themselves, and that's a whole new experience. That's that secondary loss that then they've got to learn new roles and put on different hats to cope also whilst they're grieving. So there's often lots of other losses too, not just the loss of the person, but the loss of all the other things that entail and go along with that as well. And sometimes that can be, for us, it was the loss of being a mother. It was for my husband, his loss of being a parent and a father. It was the loss of potentially being a grandparent. So many other losses that you also have to keep grieving. That's why I don't think we just get to this acceptance stage and then we're all better, because there's so many different acceptances along the way. I lost my son 12 years ago, and then there's still all those future losses of I won't see him get married. I won't see him have children of his own or be a grandparent. And I find when I do public speaking, there's always going to be some tears, because grief is always with us. It doesn't go away. We can't just get through it and then we're all better. And I think that's okay. I hope you're comfortable with that. That's, I think, my way of honouring the love that I had for my son and the love which is also the grief. And in our society, we have this DSM-5 scale. It's this diagnostic tool that measures mental health. And they call them grief disorders. If you've had ongoing long-term grief for over 12 years, then now it's a grief disorder. And that doesn't mean that you're mentally unwell. It just means that you're human. It doesn't mean that I cry through all my counselling sessions. It doesn't mean I cry when I go to the shops. In the beginning, of course, I did. I'd see a stroller and I'd be a mess. But 12 years on, the grief changes. It turns more into love and less into pain. And it's always still there. And sometimes it just sneaks up on you when you least expect it. But it doesn't go away. And it doesn't mean I have a disorder, and it doesn't mean I don't function most of the time. It's just when you talk about things that are personal to you, of course it's emotional, because it meant so much to me. And so the book that I've written is about my journey. I work with all sorts of grief and loss, but especially I enjoy working with this disenfranchised grief, which is around infertility and loss, because the statistics are pretty crazy. 1 in 4 women will experience pregnancy and infant loss. We know that 1 in 6 couples experience infertility issues. And even if you haven't experienced it yourself, it's not often that someone doesn't know of someone who struggled to have children if it hasn't been themselves. If you're brave enough, put up your hand if you know someone who's lost a baby or a pregnancy, or you have yourself. If you don't have to, if you don't feel comfortable today. But if you have, thank you for sharing. I honour you. And I honour your bravery to put your hand up. And for me, it was a long journey. It started when I was a little girl. It actually started as maybe an 8-year-old, a 10-year-old, a 12-year-old. You grow up in this Pronatalist Society where people expect that if you're a woman, you'll have babies. You'll get married, usually, and then you'll have children. And even if you don't get married and you just have a partner, it's pretty much expected that you will have babies. And so growing up in this society from such a young age, I was only 12, and I remember going to the markets with my mother, and she saw this lovely little old lady, and she was crocheting little baby sets of clothes. And she always has called me Nellie. And she said, "Nellie, we have to get you some baby clothes." And I'm like, "Mum, I'm 12. And she's like, No, but ladies with these beautiful skills that can do this lovely crochet work, they might not be around later on when you have children in your 30s or 40s. So how about we get them now?" And so from this young age, it was kind of expected. It wasn't when I'm a grandmother or when you're a mother. It wasn't if you're a grandmother, if I'm a grandmother, or if you're a mother. It was when. It is going to happen. It's not going to happen now because you're 12, but it is going to happen. And so we grow up in this society where it is expected. And so then when I got to the age of looking for the perfect partner, I think that's also a journey that, as women especially, men too, I don't want to discount men in this because I know men often get discounted when we talk about grief and loss and infertility, and they definitely feel it too. But I know that women in particular, and I guess because I'm a woman and that's my experience, so that's all I can talk to, but I know we have men in the audience and I honour them. We have this biological clock ticking. We have this prince that we have to find. We have these children that we have to have. There's so many demands that come to us directly or indirectly. Society might not say you have to do this, but every book you read, every movie you watch, there's always a happily ever after. They find the prince or the princess and they live happily ever after. And so that was my first, I guess, expectation that I put on myself to find the perfect partner. And as many of you know, that's not an easy task either. And so we've got this biological clock ticking that we have to get to it because, the eggs will dry up and we've got to have the babies before we're 35 or our chance of pregnancy is reduced. So I was fortunate enough to find this perfect man. And I know no one's perfect, but my husband is perfect to me. And I say that because throughout the whole journey of infertility that we went through together, we actually went through it together. And I know lots of my female clients tell me that they feel very alone, even with their partner, because they're both grieving differently. It doesn't mean that the man's not feeling it, because I know men feel grief as much as women do. But sometimes men in our society have even less permission to grieve than women do. Sometimes they have this persona that they have to be the strong type to support their partner or to support the female. They have to be strong, and they have even less permission to cry or to grieve than women are given often. And this is a generalization. It's not always this way, but often even men have less space to grieve than women do. So then I found the man, and then just assuming that we would have children and be happily ever after, then another grief came along, and that was the grief that I wasn't going to have children naturally. And the journey ahead of me, which was the IVF journey, which is the journey I chose because I naturally couldn't have children and I had this dream to have children. And so I chose that path, and I know not everyone chooses that path. And if you do, or you have been through that path, you'll know how scary it is and how horrible it is and what a roller coaster it is of all the ups and the downs and the losses along the way. Because it's not just one loss, there's multiple losses. You're there because you've already lost this supposedly God-given right to have children naturally like everyone else supposedly can. But then you've also lose all this control along the way every time a cycle doesn't work. Every time one of those eggs doesn't implant. Every time you get pregnant and then sometimes lose the pregnancy. And this is happening not just for women doing IVF, but 1 in 4 women go through pregnancy loss. This is so many of us in our society. And that's why I speak, because we need to talk about this. We need to feel the feelings. Even though they're not comfortable, it's so important that we feel them so that we can heal. So then all the cycles of IVF that I went through, if you want to read my journey, it's in my book. I'm not going to go into all the details here. And then to get pregnant and to think, wow, we've overcome the odds. We've been through this horrific battlefield of IVF that we never thought we'd have to do in the first place, but then we found ourselves in this battlefield. And then we survived, and then we came out the other side with a pregnancy. What else could possibly go wrong? And you don't prepare yourself for anything else to go wrong because you've already been through so much. Surely you think someone's going to look down on you and just bless you with this child and everything will be eventually happily ever after. But it wasn't meant to be for us. My pregnancy ended at 23 weeks. And my beautiful son, River, who's always with me, he passed away after 45 minutes. And so then there was another grief of losing a person. So already there's been so many griefs and losses, and then there's another big grief and loss, and then you end up in this space where then you realise, well, we realised that I was then going to be a childless woman because I couldn't put myself or my husband through that again. I had to stop. For me, it was protective. For me, it was all I could choose in that moment. And I know some people go on for years and years and years, and that's their choice, and that's okay. But for me, after 5 cycles, we were emotionally and financially bankrupt. So there's also that loss as well. IVF's very expensive. And so choosing a horrible choice, not a choice that you want to make, but choosing not to continue, choosing to be a childless person, then brings up all this other grief because, as I've said, in this Pronatalist Society we're living in, it's not often you run into a new person and they're like, so, do you have children? Or even if they don't ask, do you have children? Sometimes they're blatant enough to say, so how many children do you have? And again, it's just this expectation that I'm a woman, I'm in my 40s, I must have children, or there's something wrong with me. And I know some people are childless not by choice, like myself. It was my choice to be a mother and it didn't work out that way. But I know other people are childless by choice. Some people actually choose not to have children, and that's okay too. That should be their choice. But they also get frowned on in our society for being childless. And so whether you are childless by choice or not by choice, it's a huge adjustment that then lives with you for the rest of your life. As I said, then you're not going to weddings, you're not going to first days of school, you're not going to graduations. Lots of friends come and go along the way because sometimes, as I said before, they can't sit there in your pain with you. They can't hold space for you. It makes them so uncomfortable that they move away. So some people fell away. Some people, maybe we pushed away because they just didn't get it. And it was too painful to be around someone that just didn't get it. To try and be someone that you're not. To try and be happy and smile when you can't because you're grieving. And no one's giving you that permission. So we gave ourselves permission to grieve, and we did actually put some distance between the people who couldn't be there for us, who couldn't accept us in our darkest times. And sometimes you just grow apart from people because they're walking a very different journey to you. And it's not that sometimes you can't be there for their christenings and sometimes you can't be there for their birthday parties, but sometimes you just don't have much in common with them because all they can see and all of their focus is their children, and that's okay. I love and accept that for them. But you need to acknowledge yourself as well. And so in those moments, the kindest thing sometimes for us was to just sit in our own space and not force ourselves into being inauthentic and pretending to be happy when we weren't. Because you have to feel all those feelings. You have to move through grief to find some comfort at the other side. You can't just pretend you're happy and start smiling and ignore it and push it away. Otherwise, it shows up in so many other ways, or it explodes when you least expect it because you've been pushing it down for so long, and then someone will just say something to you and you'll be triggered and it will just explode. And someone will be like, I didn't even say anything. Where did this come from? And it's just all this pain that you've been holding onto for so long that you haven't expressed. And so I talk to my grief clients about that. We need to, I call it dose the grief. We need to spend some time sitting with the grief. We need to spend some time sitting in the pain without turning the light on. We need to sit in the dark. We need to honour the grief. And we need to spend some time doing that, even though it's really painful. And we know you can't do that all day, every day, because it would literally drive you crazy. It's too much. But we can't ignore it all day, every day either. Because if we ignore it all the time, it just festers. And it's not healthy for us. So this dosing is actually giving ourselves some time and space to acknowledge all the things we've been through and accept, even if the people around you can't, that that's okay. You're doing the best you can. And the good news is there's no right or wrong way to do grief. So you can't get it wrong, even though people might imply that you're doing it wrong. We live in that society where it's like, well, you went to the funeral on Friday, you should have closure now, we'll see you at work on Monday. But we all know, anyone who's already put their hand up and told me that they've experienced some of what I'm talking about knows that it doesn't go away in 3 days. It doesn't go away in 3 years. Look, I'm still teary talking about it 12 years later. And that's okay. That's okay. That's why I talk. That's why I'm here to open this conversation so we don't shy away from it. So we honour our grief and we allow ourselves to heal properly. And so we can hold space for other people around us without trying to fix them or cheer them up and rush them through their grief as well. Because if it's not you, it is the biggest gift that you can give to someone else, just to hold space for them. The people who tried to fix me or tried to cheer me up, it didn't help. I think the best thing one of my lovely closest friends ever said to me was, sometimes you just need to give yourself permission to feel like shit. That was helpful to me at the time because it honoured what I was feeling. Because when we get rushed through our grief or people don't listen or they try and cheer us up, it actually discounts our feelings. It actually gets us to push them down even deeper because we know that it's not emotionally safe to air our secrets, to air our pain and our grief. So we push it down and we don't talk about it. That's why, as a counsellor, I get people to talk about it. Tears are very welcome in this space because through the pain we grow and through the healing we can experience this post-traumatic growth that I talked about. We can experience this other place where you can move through your pain to a place where you can help others, whether it's just being that listening ear and holding space for a friend, whether it's doing what I have done and holding space on a professional level for people as a counsellor or as a public speaker, or in my book. And I think my book helps to validate people's feelings too, because although my story is not their story, there are so many universal themes in there that I think so many people experience when they're going through grief and loss, especially around infertility. And it just helps those people to know that they're not alone. So if you would like to get a copy of my book, I know some people are leaving, but if you would like a copy, they will be for sale for about 15 minutes after I finish talking. And I think I've probably rambled on long enough. Did anyone have any questions for me about grief and loss? I know it's a topic that you might not feel comfortable sharing publicly, and that's okay. If you want to come and have a chat to me after the conversation, we can do that too. I'm more than happy to hold space for you and talk to you. So yeah, please feel free to know that you can come forward, and you can do that if you feel guided to. But I won't put anyone on the spot and ask them to talk publicly. I'm going to finish up there. If you did want to grab a copy of my book, they're for sale today, $28.95, or you can find them online or in your local bookshop. You can ask for them. They're available everywhere, and if they're not, they should be, so ask for them and they will order them in for you. And it's been so beautiful to share this space with you today. Thank you for being brave enough to share this space with me. Thank you, everyone.